broadcast to the officers, so I don't have the police. The entirety of this call was relayed to the Covington police officers responding.
You said US Bank 6 in Madison, 602 Madison? Okay. What did it look like? Did you play a weapon? So, he didn't show a firearm of any kind? So did he see? Okay. Now we're getting a description from somebody else also. Male, black, skinny, with glasses, missing teeth, dark gray hoodie. Does that sound like him? Somebody else from inside the bank calling? What is your name? Chad, if I need to call you back, are you 4960761? He did it. He displayed it. Okay. All right. You got officers there. We're talking to security on the other line, okay? So we'll talk to them, okay? Do you see officers outside? Okay, you can hang up. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Okay, the call that we just heard was a call from one of the bank employees actually inside the U.S. Bank at 6 in Madison. There was an additional 911 call from the U.S. Bank Corporate Security Office. That caller relayed very similar information. However, that caller was not inside the bank. They were getting things secondhand. There was also one other call after the shots were fired from someone inside of the Hotel Covington, but that was after the bank robbery. So what's important to glean out of this is that the officers were told that the suspect that they were looking for was trying to rob the bank using a can of gasoline, as well as brandishing a handgun, along with the description of the suspect. There were approximately a half dozen officers that responded to the scene. The two that were involved in the shooting that discharged their weapons, the first one, Specialist Wade Webster. Specialist Webster is assigned to second shift patrol. He's been serving the city of Covington since 2023. His prior law enforcement experience in Newport News, Virginia, began a police officer there in 2018. He is a bike patrol officer and, if I'm not mistaken, was actually wearing a bike patrol uniform on the day in question. And he's got no history of complaints or discipline to speak of. The other officer involved was Officer Fotikon Hampodichuk, common spelling, pronunciation. He is more commonly referred to around the Covington Police Department as. He is also on second shift patrol, serving the city of Covington this go-round since October of 2023. However, he has prior law law enforcement experience, 20 years with the city of Covington before retiring, and then he was hired by the City of Independence Police Department before returning to the city of Covington. He previously was a member of the Covington SWAT team. He too has no history of discipline or complaints. Anytime you guys come here for one of my press conferences, it should be an automatic trigger warning because all we do is talk about horrible stuff. However, these videos are unedited and may contain both language and depictions that some people will find offensive. The paper that you see scattered all across the ground right there, you'll see in the officer's body camera video that we're going to watch next, is actually U.S. currency that was stolen from U.S. Bank that our suspect, Charles Davis, was dropping as he walked down the alley. What you'll see on the body cam video that we're going to watch next from Officer Webster is that he has arrived simultaneously with Officer Josh Denny, who went to the front door of the bank and stayed at the front door of the bank. Officer Webster was flagged down by an employee of the hotel who was pointing down the alley, directing them to where the suspect had gone. When we watch Officer Webster's body cam video, we will pick it up while he is in his patrol car as he is getting his initial dispatch. If you're not familiar with the way Axon body-worn camera systems work, the cameras are always recording the video, but not audio. So the first 90 seconds of any body-worn camera is going to be without audio. That's not a malfunction, that's the way the camera system works, because it is actually backing up in time and saving the last 90 seconds of video before the camera was activated. Cameras can be activated in a number of different ways. They can be activated anytime. They can be activated manually by the officer. They're also automatically activated anytime the officer turns on his emergency lights, which I believe is what activated Officer Webster's body camera in this instance, as well as do other things like whenever they release their patrol rifles or something like that in the cruiser, that too can do it. But I think in this case we're going to be talking about activation of the emergency lights in Officer Webster's car. I will note we're only going to watch Officer Webster's body camera video because Officer HP did not activate his body camera video when he exited his police cruiser. He didn't realize that his camera wasn't recording until after the incident. His body-worn camera starts long after the shots have already been fired and the scene is being processed, so that's not really of any evidentiary value. But this is Officer Webster's. Mary, you'll have the rest of the video. It's just Officer Webster being walked to a police car and getting in a police car from there. The entire video is on the flash drives that have been handed out. Kentucky Revised Statutes 503.050 is the law that discusses justified uses of deadly force in Kentucky. The law is no different for police officers than it is for any other citizen. What is important to remember is that the law is not, we don't look at it in hindsight. It's not a 20/20 hindsight. They'll require us to look at the situation from the standpoint of the officers, what they knew and what they were dealing with at the time. And in essence, what Kentucky law says is that anyone in Kentucky is justified in the use of deadly force if they reasonably believe from what they knew at the time that the use of deadly force was required to repel someone using deadly force on them. In other words, if what someone was about to do to them would result in death or serious physical injury, then the use of deadly force is justified. In this situation, this is what the officers were dealing with. Now, granted, this is when the second volley of shots were fired. This is what Officer Webster was looking at, but they had already been dealing with the suspect they knew was armed. They were told with a firearm. He had threatened the gun, brandished the gun at the U.S. Bank before this confrontation in the alley. The gun was not initially in his hands as Specialist Webster approached, but when the suspect drew the weapon, it was reasonable for the officers to believe that he intended to use that weapon on them and that their lives were at risk of death or serious physical injury. So both officers were justified both in the use of deadly force to defend themselves as well as their fellow officer. As it turns out in this case, the gun that Mr. Davis possessed wasn't actually a gun. This is some kind of toy gun or Nerf gun that, as you can see in the pictures, has been modified with a dark colored tape in order to cover up any indication that would have let the officers know that the suspect was actually brandishing only a toy gun. However, as you can see in the photo on the left, the gun that he was holding, albeit a toy, looked very real to the officers. I've got to say that if I was ever faced with someone pointing a gun at me like Officer Webster was having a gun pointed at him, they could count on me firing it back at them as well. What this means is that we are declining to proceed with any criminal charges. There's no probable cause to believe that any criminal offenses were committed by the officers. The case will not be presented to the grand jury because prosecutors are ethically barred from any further proceedings when a prosecutor doesn't believe that there's probable cause that a criminal offense was committed. The copy of this letter in stating my findings, as well as the intention not to take the case to the grand jury, is on the flash drive that's been handed out to you. Our suspect in this case is Charles Davis. These are various still shots from the video, but you can see, again, it looked very much like a real handgun that he was brandishing, certainly real enough. Mr. Davis was born in 1962. His latest known address is in the 1200 block of Scott Street here in Covington. He hasn't been a lifelong resident of Kentucky, however. He's got nothing but minor, mostly alcohol-related offenses on his criminal history in Kentucky. However, his NCIC shows that he's got prior arrests in Alabama for burglary, receiving stolen property, fraud, and manslaughter. He's now facing federal bank robbery charges. The FBI has intervened in this case when Mr. Davis was originally transported to University of Cincinnati Medical Center for treatment of his gunshot wounds that were, to my knowledge, never life-threatening. Once he was released after a few days in University Hospital, he was arrested on the FBI's criminal complaint charging him with bank robbery. Mr. Davis is currently housed in the Campbell County Detention Center. This, fortunately, is a very straightforward case, I believe. The most important thing to note is that no officers were injured during the capture of Mr. Davis and the investigation of this bank robbery. I will, however, field any questions you all might have at this time.
How many shots were fired, and which officer fired which shots first?
Kentucky State Police investigated the case. They have done a round count. I don't know off the top of my head. I've known it's part of their investigation, but I don't remember exactly how many shots were fired. The first shots were fired by Specialist Webster and subsequently by Officer HP. Officer HP then fires 2 more subsequent shots as the suspect continues to brandish the weapon, and then again as the officers are struggling over the weapon with him. And if you slow this, the computer program when we download these doesn't have the same slow motion function, frame by frame function that the Axon system does, but you all, I trust, in the news media will be able to slow this down. When you do, you'll see that as they're wrestling with Mr. Davis, struggling over this gun, he is bringing the gun towards Officer HP's head when that last shot is fired, and that is why the last shot is fired, because he was successful in getting his arm out of Specialist Webster's grasp and was moving the gun towards Officer HP's head.
It was hard to see in the video, but were they trying to perform life-saving measures?
Yes. Yes, Mr. Davis still had a pulse, so there was no need to perform CPR, but they did cut his clothes off him, and they were applying tourniquets and bandages and things until the fire department arrived on the scene just a few minutes later, and the fire department's just right up the road. In the other body-worn camera videos that I've seen from the other responding officers, not the ones that shot because they were removed from the scene, so you only get a limited idea of exactly how much emergency medical attention the officers provided. But when you watch all the other officers' body camera videos, you can tell that they are going to great lengths to try and save Mr. Davis's life.
Where is he now?
In the Campbell County Detention Center.
So I know the original call for service mentioned a can of gasoline. Was that recovered at the scene?
I don't know. The FBI took over the investigation. I know that at the time that I was on the scene, the can of gasoline had not been recovered yet. What the subsequent investigation found about the bank robbery, I don't know, because we have let the federal authorities take that case.
How long did this all play out from the call to when
The shots were fired? Well, you saw Officer Webster's video there. It's not more than just a few minutes.
Can you explain how rare or common it is for when a suspect is shot, for them to still be able to get up and reach for their gun, and explain why multiple shots sometimes have to be fired?
Well, you have to keep firing until the threat is neutralized. That's what the officers are trained to do. That's what anybody, once they make a decision to use deadly force, it doesn't really make sense to use deadly force and stop if the threat still exists. So they are trained to continue firing until the threat is neutralized. In this instance, I've never seen anything like this. I'm sure it's happened before. In my career, I've never dealt with a case where somebody was shot and then popped back up and reached for the gun. That was a first for me. Certainly gives you an idea of how Mr. Davis, how intent Mr. Davis was on this confrontation with police. I don't know if this was a instance where he was intending to commit suicide by police or whether this was some other sort of mental break, but he knew or should have known that he had a toy gun in his hand, one that was not actually capable of injuring the officers, however, one that certainly looked real enough to get him shot. And then even after he was shot, usually when I've seen cases of people that are committing suicide by police, after the first time they get shot and it hurts really bad, they stop. So he was either very intent on getting them to finish the job by shooting him again, or else he was suffering some other sort of mental break where he thought that retrieving that toy gun was going to help his cause.
Has your office filed or do you plan to file any additional charges for the threatening and brandishing of firearm? Charles Davis?
Well, no, because there's no wanton endangerment charge against Mr. Davis here because he pointed a toy gun at him. So, that's significant that it's a toy and why we're not pursuing like a wanton endangerment charge. However, the fact that it was a toy is not significant when it comes to the officer's decisions to use deadly force because the gun looks so real.
Yeah, I was going to ask the distinguishing between a toy and a real gun. I mean, just really how hard is that in a split second like that? Because in that one picture,
It looks real, doesn't it? Yeah, it looks real enough. That's, if somebody's going to go commit any kind of crime with any gun, they're greatly increasing the chances of them getting shot by police. But using a toy gun is no different than using a real gun when it comes to the police officer decisions, especially if the gun like that one had been altered in order to make it look real, to defeat whatever safety precautions that toy had on it, to, you know, bright colors, things like that, were covered up by the dark tape that had been wrapped around the gun.
How much money did you take?
I don't have an exact figure. There's mostly 5s and 1s you'll see on the body cam video when it's mostly 5s and 1s blowing around the alley. There's a lot of it, but given the smaller denominations, again, that's will be part of the FBI investigation, not ours.
Does the FBI just tend to step in when it comes to bank robbery?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Does the FBI just tend to step in with these bank robbery investigations? Is that common?
Well, it's kind of funny you ask that. No, I haven't had the FBI take a bank robber off our hands in years. However, I think that there's recently been a change in administration. Perhaps this is reflective of a change in mission statement of what the FBI is doing these days. Of course, this is all just my speculation, but we just had another bank robbery today in Covington, so we'll see if they take that one off our hands too.
I know that you said that Officer HP's body camera wasn't on. Was it not working, or like you said, you thought he turned it on?
He did not respond lights and sirens, so his did not kick on automatically like Specialist Webster's did. That means that in order for him to start recording, he would have had to manually activate it. At the time he pulled up next to that alley, HP parked right at the top of the alley, got out of his cruiser, and could hear Specialist Webster screaming, "Drop the gun, show me your hands," things of that nature, and he just forgot. So certainly in a perfect world, he would have kicked that on manually, but under the circumstances, given what he was hearing Specialist Webster scream, I can understand. Fortunately, we have both Webster's body camera functioning properly, as well as that nearby business security camera that both clearly depict what happened. Yes, sir.
Is this presentation in the book on the flash drive?
Yes, sir. The videos, the officer's photos, the letter, and the photos of the gun and Mr. Davis are all included on the flash drives.
The 911 calls?
No, I forgot to add the 911 calls. So
It's hard to hear over the thing.
actually, well, I'd say if you email me, I can email you the 911 call. It's not a very big file. Likewise, I've got these. If for some reason you all need access to these, if it's easier for you, I've got them on my YouTube channel for my office. I just didn't think it would be real practical to put a YouTube link in the presentation, but if anybody wants to get them off YouTube, just send me an email and I'll email you the links.
So what's next?
That is up to the U.S. Attorney, the ones pursuing an indictment of Mr. Davis for the bank robbery. As far as I'm concerned, Specialist Webster and Officer HP are cleared to return to duty. I know that the City of Covington still has their administrative process, their internal investigations, things like that, that are underway, as well as officers are typically sent to see a psychologist to make sure that they are fit for duty before returning to duty after something traumatic like this. So I don't know where that stands in the process, but in terms of the investigation into any potential criminal charges is closed now. So short of KSP wrapping up a few loose ends, waiting for things like toxicology reports on Mr. records, things like that, that's the only thing that is preventing them from closing their file.
Just make sure, so you guys conduct their investigation, they conducted that investigation, you made your decision based off of that?
Yes, sir. That's absolutely correct. It has pretty much become, it's not a state law or anything, but it's pretty much become standard operating procedure, not just in the City of Covington, but for all of our local police departments, that if they have an officer involved use of deadly force, state police critical incident response team is called in to handle the investigation into the use of force. And then in this case, just so happens the FBI took the bank robbery off our hands as well. So the City of Covington didn't have anything left to investigate. They just have their internal procedures. Anything else? Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate it.